The forced sales of lots in strata schemes has been a vexing issue for government for a very, very long time, and they finally decided to do something about it, probably under the guise of the housing crisis. So one of the issues, and I suppose if you go back to the castle and the vibe and all that sort of stuff, is that people aren't going to be required to sell their properties unless they want to. Except in strata, there's always an element of compromise. So the government has created a mechanism in the new legislation to allow a body corporate to force people to sell their lots even if they don't want to. But that's the headline. The reality is that the mechanics of doing so are really different. And the very first thing that everyone needs to understand is that before a body corporate can get through into this process, there needs to be economic reasons to do so. And economic reasons are, in a residential context, the situation where it's not economically viable now for the body corporate or over the next 5 years to maintain the scheme in the way that it's required to be maintained, which instantaneously, in a sense, is a breach of the body corporate statutory obligations. So this is only going to be applicable to bodies corporates that are in a really poor state of repair. So if your body corporate is, or your building's fine and is run well, then this simply is not going to apply to you. After that, there's quite a few hoops that have to be jumped through, and the legislation is really complex, as you'd expect for something of this nature, and there's also protection mechanisms for people on the way through. The first thing is that the body corporate needs a pre-termination plan. That's one that sets out the market value of the property as a whole, the market value of the individual lots, and also sets out the reasons why the body corporate's not economically viable. And that must include reports from people like structural engineers, builders and quantity surveyors that set out in detail the financial reasons for it. That needs to go to all owners, and there's an extended period of time for owners to consider that. Part of it also, then the next step is a termination plan. That plan then deals with what happens when the scheme comes to an end. How are the proceeds distributed? What liabilities are there and how are they dealt with? For example, administration contracts for body corporate managers, or even management rights agreements. It could be easements. It could be leases to telephone companies, telecommunications providers on the roof. All of those need to be dealt with as part of the program. Then that termination plan needs to be approved by all owners in a termination resolution. So, and the termination resolution is the piece that requires the 75% vote. So the decision to accept a termination report and accept a termination plan is what's called majority resolution, which is more than 50% of the owners of the lots in the scheme voting for it. So that's not of those who choose to vote. So if you've got 100 lots, 51 need to vote yes. And the decision to actually terminate the scheme after all of those reports have been provided and after people have had at least 5 months collectively to consider them is then that 75% vote. There are mechanisms on the way through for people to challenge either the termination plan or the pre-termination report before things are given effect. But if it goes all the way through that, the body corporate must then appoint a facilitator who will basically shut the building down and deal with it in accordance with the termination plan. So that's what the legislation requires. For mine, that'll be at least a probably 12-month process, possibly longer, subject to what people do along the way with challenging them. And obviously the more people you've got in a building, the harder it's going to be to get one across the line. So it's an interesting testing of the waters from government. It'll be really interesting also to see how it works in practice. But if you're not sure and need help, please reach out.